Picture this. It's January 1953 at the General Motors Motorama in New York City. Harley Earl, GM's legendary design chief, unveils a sleek white roadster to a packed crowd of journalists and executives. The car is gorgeous, low, curvy, distinctly American. But here's the thing that has everyone whispering. The entire body is made of plastic. Not steel, not aluminum. Plastic. Fiberglass reinforced plastic, to be precise. Ford's executives in the crowd exchange knowing smirks. One engineer allegedly turns to his colleague and mutters, "Chevrolet just built a toy car for grown men. This thing will melt in the sun." They laughed at what they called Chevy's plastic sports car. They mocked the underpowered six-cylinder engine. They dismissed the entire concept as a desperate gimmick. But by 1957, that plastic sports car had become an American icon, while Ford's response, the Thunderbird, had already abandoned the two-seat sports car formula. This is the story of how Chevrolet's revolutionary gamble on fiberglass technology created a legend, how Ford initially crushed them in sales but lost the war, and how one Belgian engineer named Zora Arkus-Duntov saved the Corvette from cancellation and turned it into the performance machine Ford couldn't match. To understand why Ford laughed at the Corvette, you need to understand the automotive landscape of 1953. American car companies built cars from steel. Period. The process was well established. Massive stamping dies formed sheet steel into body panels. These panels were welded together on assembly lines that had been perfected over decades. The tooling for a single steel body could cost $5 million. But once you had it, you could pump out hundreds of thousands of cars. Nobody in Detroit seriously considered alternatives. Steel was strong, steel was proven. Steel was how you built real cars. Then Harley Earl saw something that changed his mind. In 1951, Earl attended the Watkins Glen Grand Prix in New York. The parade lap featured dozens of European sports cars, MGTC Roadsters, Jaguar XK120s, even a few Ferraris. What struck Earl wasn't just the cars themselves, but the people driving them. Young, affluent, educated. These weren't the typical American car buyers who wanted big sedans with chrome and comfort. These were enthusiasts who valued performance, handling, and the pure joy of driving. Earl realized something profound. There was a market for a true American sports car, something that could compete with the Europeans, but carry that distinct American character. When Earl returned to Detroit, he immediately started Project Opal, a secret development program for a two-seat sports car. The design came together quickly. Earl's styling team created flowing curves, recessed headlights covered with wire mesh, a distinctive grille, and rocket-inspired taillights. The proportions were perfect. Low, wide, aggressive. But there was a problem. Building steel stamping dies for such a low-volume car made no financial sense. GM estimated they'd sell maybe 1,000 units the first year. At $5 million in tooling costs, the math didn't work. That's when someone suggested fiberglass. The material had been around since the 1930s, developed by Owens Corning for insulation. During World War II, the military used it for aircraft components and radar housings. By the early 1950s, a few companies were experimenting with fiberglass boat hulls and small parts. But nobody had ever mass-produced an entire automobile body from the stuff. The advantages were compelling. Fiberglass molds cost a fraction of steel dies. The material was lighter than steel, reducing weight and improving performance. Complex curves that would require multiple steel stampings could be molded as single fiberglass pieces. Most importantly, you could get into production fast. Instead of waiting 2 years for stamping dies, you could create fiberglass molds in months. The risks were equally obvious. Nobody knew how fiberglass would hold up in daily use. Would it crack in cold weather? Would it warp in heat? Would it survive minor accidents? Or would a parking lot fender bender shatter the entire front end? The material was flammable. There were no established repair procedures. Insurance companies didn't know how to rate it. And perhaps most damning, it just seemed cheap. Plastic cars were toys. Real cars were made of metal. Ed Cole, Chevrolet's chief engineer, saw past the skepticism. He recognized that fiberglass gave them a unique opportunity to fast-track the project. Get a running prototype to the Motorama show, gauge public reaction, and if people loved it, put it into production immediately. If they hated it, scrap the whole thing before investing serious money. Cole greenlit the project in summer of 1952. That gave Earl's team exactly 6 months to design the molds, figure out the manufacturing process, and build a show car. The engineering challenges were staggering. The Corvette body consisted of 62 separate fiberglass pieces that had to be bonded or bolted together. Each piece required trimming, filing, and sanding by hand. 200 mounting holes had to be drilled in precise locations. Early test panels revealed another problem. When the painted fiberglass bodies went through the 300-degree paint-curing ovens, tiny air bubbles surfaced, creating imperfections that required extensive rework. The workers handling fiberglass in 1952 had no protective equipment. No respirators, no gloves, nothing. They filed, sanded, and drilled fiberglass all day, breathing the dust and getting the fibers embedded in their skin. From today's perspective, it's horrifying. But in 1952, nobody understood the health risks. Despite these challenges, the Motorama show car was ready in January. The public reaction was overwhelming. People mobbed the display, drawn to the revolutionary design and exotic fiberglass body. Journalists called it the most exciting American car in decades. Orders poured in immediately. GM fast-tracked production, setting up a temporary assembly facility in Flint, Michigan. The first production, Corvette, serial number E53F001001, rolled off the line on June 30th, 1953. All 300 1953 Corvettes were essentially identical. Polo white paint, sportsman red interior, black canvas soft top. No options, no variations. Because the manufacturing process was so new, each car was slightly different. The techniques evolved during production as workers learned how to handle fiberglass. Early cars had body panels that didn't quite align. Later cars showed improved fit and finish. Under the gorgeous fiberglass body sat somewhat disappointing mechanicals. The engine was Chevrolet's Blue Flame Straight 6, about 235 cubic inch iron block unit that made a respectable 150 horsepower, thanks to triple Carter side draft carburetors, a higher compression ratio of 8:1, and a performance camshaft with solid lifters. For comparison, Chevrolet's standard truck engine, using the same basic architecture, made just 92 horsepower. The Corvette version represented a 50% increase through better breathing and higher compression. But 150 horsepower wasn't particularly impressive. In 1953, a Cadillac 5.8 made 210 horses. The Chrysler Hemi produced 180. Even worse, the Corvette came only with Powerglide, Chevrolet's 2-speed automatic transmission. No manual gearbox option existed. Sports car purists were horrified. A real sports car needed 3 pedals and a stick shift. The Powerglide, while smooth and reliable, was designed for boulevard cruising, not spirited driving. Performance was adequate, but not exciting. Top speed was 108 miles per hour. 0 to 60 took 11 seconds. Respectable, but not earth-shattering. The Jaguar XK120, the car everyone compared the Corvette to, did 0 to 60 in 10 seconds and topped out at 124 miles per hour. The Corvette also lacked basic features that buyers expected. There were no exterior door handles. You had to reach inside through the open window. There were no roll-up windows. The car used side curtains, plastic snap-on panels like a 1930s Roadster. The windshield wipers were operated by a foot pedal. The trunk was tiny because the spare tire took up most of the space. Despite the Motorama hype, actual sales were disappointing. Those 300 1953 models went to VIP customers, celebrities, and GM executives. For 1954, Chevrolet ramped up production, building 3,640 units. They sat unsold on dealer lots. The problems were obvious. At $3,500, the Corvette cost more than a Cadillac sedan, but offered less comfort, less power, and questionable reliability. The fiberglass bodies developed stress cracks. Electrical grounding issues plagued early cars because nobody had established proper grounding procedures for non-conductive fiberglass. Many dealers refused to service them. The automotive press, initially enthusiastic, turned critical. Road and Track tested a 1954 model and concluded, "The Corvette is a production sports car in appearance only." Ouch. By late 1954, GM executives were seriously considering canceling the entire program. The Corvette was bleeding money, generating bad publicity, and failing to find an audience. Then two things happened that saved the Corvette from extinction. First, in September 1954, Ford announced they were developing their own two-seat sports car to compete directly with the Corvette. Second, Chevrolet's new small-block V8 engine was ready for production. Ford's response to the Corvette came from the very top. In early 1954, Ford Division General Manager Louis Crusoe and Chief Stylist George Walker were at the Detroit Auto Show when they saw the Corvette on display. According to legend, Crusoe turned to Walker and said, "We need one of those." Walker called headquarters that same day. Designer Frank Hershey began sketching immediately. Ford's approach differed fundamentally from Chevrolet's. They weren't trying to build a pure sports car. They wanted what they called a personal car. Something sporty, stylish, and fun, but with real creature comforts and luxury features. Where the Corvette had plastic side curtains, the Thunderbird would have roll-up windows. Where the Corvette had a Spartan interior, the Thunderbird would offer power seats, power windows, and a radio that actually worked. Most importantly, the Thunderbird would use Ford's new Y-Block 5.8 from day one. No underpowered six-cylinder compromise. The 292 cubic inch V8 produced 193 horsepower, giving the Thunderbird genuine performance to back up its looks. Ford didn't use fiberglass either. The Thunderbird body was conventional steel, built using traditional stamping methods. This limited design flexibility, but ensured proven durability and easier repair. Ford wasn't gambling on revolutionary materials. They were building a car using well-understood technology. The 1955 Thunderbird debuted in October 1954 with a base price of $2,900. That's $600 less than the Corvette, despite offering more features and more power. The styling was gorgeous, clean, elegant, quintessentially 1950s American. The porthole windows and the removable hardtop became iconic. The Continental Kit spare tire mount was pure class. Ford positioned the Thunderbird brilliantly. Their advertising didn't mention sports cars or performance. They sold lifestyle, sophistication, personal luxury. The tagline was simple: a personal car of distinction. Sales were devastating for Chevrolet. Ford sold 16,155 Thunderbirds in the 1955 model year. Chevrolet sold 700 Corvettes. Let that sink in. Ford outsold Chevrolet 23-1. It was an absolute massacre. GM executives prepared to kill the Corvette program. The 1956 model was already designed and tooled, so they'd build those, then end production. The Corvette would become a footnote, a failed experiment in American sports car building. But Zora Arkus-Duntov had other ideas. Duntov was a Belgian-born engineer with a fascinating background. He'd raced motorcycles and cars in Europe before World War II, worked for Allard Motors in England building high-performance sports cars, and immigrated to America in 1946. In 1953, Duntov saw the Corvette at the Motorama show and was immediately captivated, not by what it was, but by what it could be. He saw the lightweight fiberglass body, the basic chassis architecture, and recognized enormous untapped potential. Duntov joined GM specifically to work on the Corvette. His first project was fixing the handling. The 1953 and 54 models had terrible understeer. Duntov revised the suspension geometry, stiffened the springs, upgraded the shocks, and added a proper anti-roll bar. The improvements were dramatic. The Corvette went from clumsy to genuinely fun to drive. More importantly, Duntov lobbied relentlessly for the new Chevrolet small block V8 to replace the anemic Blue Flame 6. The 265 cubic inch V8 was a masterpiece of engineering. Developed by Ed Cole's team, it weighed just 535 pounds, but produced 195 horsepower in base form. With the optional dual 4-barrel carburetor setup, it made 225 horses. Installing the V8 transformed the Corvette. Suddenly, it had performance to match its looks. 0 to 60 dropped to 8.5 seconds. Top speed increased to 119 miles per hour. Just as importantly, the Corvette now sounded like a proper sports car. The small block's distinctive burble at idle rising to a glorious howl at redline became part of the car's character. The 1956 Corvette benefited from more than just the V8. GM gave it a complete styling refresh. The awkward mesh headlight covers disappeared, replaced by sculpted bodywork and proper headlight bezels. Concave side coves added visual interest and could be painted in contrasting colors. The rear end was redesigned with more conventional taillights. Roll-up windows replaced the hated side curtains. A proper convertible top mechanism replaced the clumsy manual frame. Inside, real door handles appeared. The instruments were redesigned for better visibility. An optional removable hardtop gave year-round usability. The transformation was so complete that the 1956 model looked like an entirely new car, even though it still used the same basic fiberglass body structure. Performance options multiplied. You could now order a 3-speed manual transmission, a huge improvement over Powerglide. The dual 4-barrel carburetor V8 produced 225 horsepower. A high-lift camshaft option boosted output to 240 horses. Buyers could spec heavy-duty suspension, metallic brake linings for better stopping power, and a close-ratio 4-speed manual transmission. Duntov took a 54 Corvette test mule, installed the new V8, added aerodynamic modifications including a curved plexiglass windscreen and a tonneau cover over the passenger seat, and headed to Daytona Beach. In 1955, he achieved 150 miles per hour on the beach, setting a new American production car speed record. The publicity was priceless. Suddenly, the Corvette had performance credentials. It wasn't just a pretty face. It could actually perform. Sales improved, but only slightly. Chevrolet sold 3,600 Corvettes in 1956, while Ford moved 15,000 Thunderbirds. The Thunderbird still dominated, but the gap was closing. For 1957, Chevrolet made the Corvette even faster. The small block grew to 283 cubic inches. With mechanical fuel injection, a groundbreaking technology for American production cars, it produced 283 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch, a magical threshold that only exotic racing engines had achieved. The fuel-injected Corvette could hit 60 in 5.5 seconds and top out at 132 miles per hour. It could outrun Jaguar XK140s, Mercedes 300 SLs, even some Ferraris. And it did. It with American muscle and Chevrolet reliability. The automotive press finally took notice. Car and Driver tested a fuel-injected 57 and declared it the first American car that can be mentioned in the same sentence as Ferrari. That same year, Duntov convinced GM to let him race Corvettes at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. 3 factory-backed cars entered, all with the fuel-injected 283. They didn't win. Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Porsche dominated the top positions. But one Corvette finished 10th overall, ahead of numerous European sports cars. More importantly, all 3 cars finished, proving reliability. The racing program generated massive publicity. Americans loved seeing the Corvette competing on the world stage. Meanwhile, Ford was making a catastrophic mistake. Despite the Thunderbird's sales success, Ford executives decided the 2-seat configuration limited the market. For 1958, they redesigned the Thunderbird as a 4-seat personal luxury car. The gorgeous compact roadster became a bloated cruiser. The wheelbase stretched from 102 inches to 113. Weight ballooned from 2,800 pounds to 3,700. The sporty character evaporated. Thunderbird sales actually increased. Ford sold 37,000 units in '58, but they'd abandoned the sports car market entirely, leaving Chevrolet unopposed. The 1958 and onwards Thunderbirds competed with the Oldsmobile 98 and the Chrysler 300, not the Corvette. Ford had won the battle but surrendered the war. They'd sold more 2-seat Thunderbirds than Chevrolet sold early Corvettes, but they'd given up on the concept just when the Corvette was finding its stride. By 1960, Corvette sales hit 10,000 units annually. The car was profitable and becoming an American icon. The 1963 Stingray redesign cemented the Corvette's status as a world-class sports car with styling that looked like nothing else on the road. The fiberglass body that Ford engineers mocked in '53 became the Corvette's signature. Steel would have been heavier, more expensive to repair, and prone to rust. Fiberglass stayed lightweight, didn't corrode, and could be repaired by specialized shops. More importantly, it allowed Chevrolet to make styling changes without massive retooling costs. Each Corvette generation featured dramatic design evolution that would have cost tens of millions in new steel stamping dies. With fiberglass, you just created new molds. The material that seemed like a gimmick became a crucial competitive advantage. It kept the Corvette special, distinctive, unmistakably different from every other car on the road. Ford tried to recapture two-seat sports car magic several times. The 55 through 57 Thunderbirds became highly collectible classics worth serious money today. Ford even revived the two-seat formula briefly in the early 2000s with the retro-styled Thunderbird. It failed. The market had moved on. By then, the Corvette had owned American sports car territory for 50 years. There was no room for competitors. Think about the irony here. Ford laughed at Chevrolet's plastic sports car. They responded with a conventionally built competitor that absolutely crushed the Corvette in initial sales. They could have dominated the American sports car market for decades. Instead, they abandoned the segment after just 3 model years to chase higher volume in the personal luxury market. Chevrolet, despite catastrophic early sales, despite nearly being canceled, despite being mocked for fiberglass bodies and weak 6-cylinder engines, stuck with the program. They fixed the problems, added the V8, improved the handling, developed racing credibility, and created an icon. Today, the Corvette is in its 8th generation, still America's sports car, still using advanced composite materials as a direct descendant of that 1953 fiberglass body. The C8 mid-engine Corvette uses carbon fiber and other advanced composites extensively. The lineage is clear. Harley Earl's gamble on fiberglass in '53 enabled every innovation that followed. Without the weight savings and manufacturing flexibility of composite materials, the Corvette might have died alongside the Thunderbird's 2-seat variant. The legacy goes beyond one nameplate. The '53 Corvette proved that revolutionary materials could work in production cars. It showed that Americans would buy sports cars if they offered genuine performance. It demonstrated that sticking with a flawed product and fixing it beat abandoning ship at the first sign of trouble. Ford built a better car initially. The '55 Thunderbird was more refined, more comfortable, more powerful, and cheaper than the '55 Corvette. But Ford didn't believe in the concept enough to weather the development process. They wanted instant sales success. When the 4-seat version offered higher profits, they took it. Chevrolet believed. Through dismal sales, savage press reviews, and internal pressure to cancel, they kept improving the Corvette. Duntov's passion, Ed Cole's engineering brilliance, and Harley Earl's design vision combined to create something that transcended quarterly sales reports. They built a legend. Every time a Corvette wins at Le Mans, sets a production car lap record, or appears in an enthusiast's garage, that's validation of the choice GM made in '54 and '55 to keep going despite the Thunderbird crushing them in sales. The decision to stick with fiberglass when everyone said, use steel. The decision to race when accountants said, it wasted money. The decision to build a real sports car when Ford proved Americans wanted comfortable cruisers. 72 years after that first white roadster appeared at the Motorama, the Corvette remains. The Thunderbird exists only in nostalgia and collector circles. Ford laughed at Chevy's plastic sports car. Then they watched it become immortal while their own response became a footnote. Sometimes winning isn't about who sells more in year 1. Sometimes winning is about who is still building dreams 70 years later. The Corvette proved that revolutionary materials, passionate engineering, and refusal to quit can overcome even the most dominant competition. That 1953 prototype that Ford engineers called a toy became the foundation of an American icon that refuses to die.